this video, I'm going to walk through a Google Sheets dynamic org chart that I recently built for a network marketing client. So they had a community building initiative where individuals would sign up to be part of the community through a Google form, and then they would be placed into a hierarchy. So how it worked is each person was assigned 8 people underneath them in the order that they signed up. So let's say you're the first person to sign up and this is you. The next 8 people to sign up would be assigned to you. Then once your 8 slots are filled, the next person would get assigned to the first person underneath you, and then this process repeats. So the scope was 2 parts. 1, the client wanted a Google Sheets to automatically assign folks as they signed up, and then 2, they wanted a dynamic org chart so that when an individual put their name in, they would see a 3-tiered org chart. So exactly like something I drew here, where someone would put in their PIN code and they would appear as this dot, then they would be able to see the layer underneath them, and then the layers underneath their people. So this exercise initially sounded really easy. Then the client came back and decided to add a requirement. They wanted to allow people to indicate which person they wanted to be slotted underneath. So what that meant is if this person here indicated in their Google Form survey, hey, I actually really want to be underneath this person over here. If this was just a normal free flow logic, they would be assigned underneath this person. But the client wanted, so the logic in the Google Sheets would assign this person underneath their preference, and then the next 2 people who signed up would fill this person's remaining 2 slots. So here's the workflow. First is the Google Forms where people sign up. Note this is a fake sheet, so I only have 3 questions, first and last name, and then the PIN code of sponsor. So I use PIN codes in this project as identifiers instead of name or email address because I wanted to limit user error. So how it would work is you would fill out this form, then you get a welcome email with instructions as well as your PIN code. Then if you wanted someone to be assigned underneath your hierarchy, you would give that person your PIN code to answer in this question when they filled out the form. So the great thing about Google Forms is that it updates a corresponding spreadsheet with your answers. So here's the spreadsheet that this Google form is populating the responses. You can see columns B, C, and D correspond to the survey questions asked, and then column A is just a timestamp. So this is all just fake data that I'm using for the purposes of this video. So the first step is to assign each person a PIN code as they sign up through the Google form. So this happens in column F, and you can see that the array formula here is just looking to see, hey, is column B, is the value appear here? Is it blank? Because if it's blank, just leave this cell blank as well. But if it's not, then pull in a PIN code from this tab. So I hard-coded a list of 7-digit PIN codes because I needed to make sure that they didn't duplicate. And if you use a dynamic formula such as random or random between, that's not a guarantee that a number won't duplicate, especially across a lot of people. Additionally, those formulas recalculate with every change in your spreadsheet, and you don't want that. Once you've assigned a PIN, it should stay the same forever. So going back to the form responses, you can see that the order of the PIN codes exactly match the order of the PIN codes on your PIN codes tab. And the reason why it has to be an array formula is that Google Form works where every new response will push down the row of your spreadsheet. And so if you just had this as a regular formula without the array formula, it would actually be blank because the inserted new line would push down your formula. And so there wouldn't actually be an assigned PIN code. So to make sure you don't have to manually come back here and keep dragging down the cells to populate the formula, this array formula does the trick. So next up is the master tab. So the thinking behind this is to create a very clean sheet for admins to look at everyone who signed up, their PIN codes, and the person, or we're going to call them sponsors, that they're assigned under. So I've highlighted the blue columns to kind of indicate, hey, these are just pulling in information versus a calculation of a new value. And so you don't really need these other than the fact it's just nice to reference some of these values in the same sheet that you're working in. So for example, this column A, it's just saying, hey, look at the form responses. And if there's a PIN code in column F, then pull it into this column, right? And remember, column F is where you did all of those assigned PIN codes. So if a PIN code appears, and it will only appear if somebody's filled out the survey response, then pull it in here. All right. The next one, I think it would be a good time to go over the index match formulas. So I use this formula a lot. It is a good alternative to lookup functions because it doesn't care about sorting. So the way it works is you start with the index function, which takes 3 inputs: the reference, i.e. the columns where the values you want returned live, the row number, and the column number. The way I use it is I always point the reference to a single column where the value I want returned lives, and then so my column number is always 1 because there's only one column in my reference. Now the match function is used to figure out what the row number is. Match takes 3 parameters: search key, or what value should the function search for, the range, which the function should search in, and then search type. I always use 0, which means exact match. So putting together the index and match functions will give you an accurate lookup that doesn't depend on how your reference database is sorted. So column B and C use the index match function to pull in the name corresponding to this pin code, as well as did this pin code request a specific sponsor. And the reason why column B's formula looks a little bit fancy is because I wanted the name to be the first name and then the first initial of the last name. And so this concatenate joins these columns together. And then this left function just trims the last name so only the first initial is shown. So calculating this, you can see instead of Brenda Kelsey, I just see Brenda K. And then column C, we're using this index match formula to find out if this specific person, if Brenda K, has requested a specific sponsor. This if error function, this is again just for formatting reasons. So if I didn't have this if error function and there was no pin code populated in column A, it would pop up those hashtag n/A, and that just looks really ugly and crowds up your spreadsheet. So the if error function says, hey, if you can't calculate the formula that I've written here, then just leave the cell blank. Now the money is in these 2 columns, right? Which sponsor should each person be actually assigned to? So to figure that out, we are going to go to the flow chart, and this is definitely where it gets interesting. So the first thing I'm doing is pulling in everyone's pin code. So this is the exact same formula that I used in the master tab, right? If a pin code appears in the form responses, pull it in the order that they appear. And just give it a little time to calculate. Next, I'm going to assign an index number to each person or each pin code. And this is entirely optional, but I just like working with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, rather than these random 7-digit numbers. This sequence function simply keeps assigning numbers in a sequential order. So this is saying, hey, how many rows should I basically count up to? And it's just looking at, hey, how many responses have been recorded in the form responses? And then it just counts up and increments by 1 as long as there's a pin code assigned. The next column is the order column. Now this is going to look exactly the same as index, and it has the exact same formula, but it serves a very different purpose. Read this order column as first, second, third, fourth. And this is going to be the order that we assign free flow people within the hierarchy. You should read it as person index number 1 is first in order to get, well, nobody as a sponsor. But person index number 2 is second in order, and therefore they should receive the first person index number 1. That makes sense. So these correspond to each other. In a free flow system, the first 8 people after the first person will get assigned to the first person, right? And then the next 8 will get assigned to index person number 2. The next 8 folks will get assigned to index person number 3. This column is hard-coded because it's simply the easiest way to do this. I'm sure there's a fancy formula that can do a sequential repeating sequence, but honestly, it was just easier for me to hard-code this. So if we were in a 100% free flow system, this is where we would end. But we're not, remember? This free flow order in this scenario is going to get interrupted and adjusted when someone specifically requests a sponsor. So let me repeat that. Interrupted and adjusted. So we're going to first capture the interruptions. So in column E, I'm just pulling in the requested sponsor pin code for each person's response. So if they said in their Google form, hey, I want to specifically be under this person and this is their pin code, just going to pull that in. And then the next column is just going to transform those sponsor pin codes into index numbers. And again, completely optional. This is just what I like to do. Now this next column called override, this is going to answer yes or no, should we interrupt the flow with this requested sponsor? So just because you requested a sponsor doesn't mean we're going to give you your choice, right? There's actually 2 criteria that you need to fulfill if you want to override. Number 1 is we need to compare the requested sponsor index to the index of the sponsor you would have been assigned in a free flow order. And only if the requested sponsor index is further down the order, i.e. hasn't come up in the free flow, should we override. For example, if we look at index person number 10, they requested index person number 1, when under a free flow system, they would have been assigned index person number 2. Since 1 is less than 2, they're not going to get their override choice, because what this is saying is, hey, the person you wanted already got their 8 slots filled. So you were too late in requesting, and now you're just going to get who you would have gotten under a free flow system. The second criteria is we will only ever allow 8 slots under each person. So if more than 8 people request a given person, even if they fulfill that first criteria, we're not going to give someone more than 8 people. So anyone more than 8 requests is just going to get their free flow assignment. And that is what these formulas are trying to do. It's just moving through an if this, if that, if this, then this kind of statement. And so you can see here that we're not actually going to give the override choice for any of these folks, but we are going to give it to these folks who requested index person number 5 when under a free flow system, they would have been assigned to people higher up in the order. And then also 8 people have not already chosen index person number 5 before them. So again, this column G is answering, should I interrupt this flow? Then column H says, okay, if you answer yes to column G, I need to know where in the order should I skip, right? And so we're going to look at returning the order number. So column C, we're going to look at returning the order number by looking at the requested sponsor index from column F within the free flow column, right? So this probably makes more sense if we actually just look at an example. So index person number 23, they're requesting index person number 5, and we are going to grant them this override. However, we need to know, okay, what order should we skip, right? Because now when it gets to index person number 5, we don't want to assign more than 8 people. So we want to remove 4 of the 5 from that natural order. So you can see here that it's actually looking through this free flow column and saying, when is the first time you're finding index person number 5 in the order? Oh, it's at order number 34. Let's return 34, right? Now the second time somebody requested number 5, we don't want to return 34 again. So that's why we have a count. We're looking to see if anyone above you has already requested this index person number 5. And if so, we're going to +1 your order number. So the first 4 index person number 5s show up in order 34, 35, 36, and 37. And that's what you'll see here, 34, 35, 36, and 37. So then column I is this final interruption action. It's specifying which order numbers we should skip over and filter out, right? So before we had said, hey, we're going to skip over the order number 34, 35, 36, and 37 because these people have requested index person number 5. So index person number 5 is going to get assigned earlier in the flow than they would have naturally. So when we do eventually get to the index person number 5, we want to skip over them. We want to filter them out. So this is only looking at, hey, does your order number appear in the column that says order to skip? Then if yes, we're just going to write filter out. Column J is going to be the order adjustment. So every time we skip an order number, we want to adjust back so that the next person who signs up will get the order number that you would have gotten if you hadn't overridden your choice with a selected sponsor. And so this is probably it could be done simpler, but this is the way that I chose to do it, right? Until we hit an override, we're not going to adjust the order at all. But then we hit our first override that we've accepted. And that means that the next person should actually get the order number 1 less than they naturally would have. And then that increases when we hit more and more overrides. And this might make sense once we calculate column K. In column K, we're saying, hey, there's an order to override this row, then skip over that row, but then keep the sequential nature of the order to the next person who didn't specify sponsor. So you can see here, we're incrementing by +1, but then when we find an override, right, we actually don't want this to be 24. We don't want this to remain order number 24. We want this person to receive what should have been assigned in order 23. And then you can see here, skip, skip, but it keeps just incrementing by 1. This will make sense because if we look over at column O and P, we have an adjusted flow. And so this is going to pull in an order, and this is just the order of incrementing by 1. And then this adjusted free flow is going to pull in the free flow column. So column D here, right? But it's going to skip over any of the free flow rows that say filter out. So you can see here, the flow remains normal, but then once we get to 5, remember 4 people requested 5 out of natural free flow order. And so you'll see here, there's only 4 number 5s that will be assigned under this adjusted free flow model. And so column L is kind of what ties it all together. So this column is saying, hey, if there is an order to override this row with a requested sponsor, then do it. Otherwise, look at the adjusted order and choose the adjusted free flow that it should be assigned to. If that doesn't make sense, we can just quickly look through this column. So very normal, first people get index person number 1, same as a regular free flow. Same for 2. You can see all the way up to this. So it's assigned 5 index people number 3, right? But then the next person requested index person number 5. We're going to say, yes, you can have index person number 5. So they're going to get index person number 5. And then the next 2 people didn't specify they wanted a sponsor. And so we're going to go back to the free flow order and keep giving them number 3. This person wanted number 5. We're going to give it to them. And then we have 1 more index person number 3 to assign. Then we move on to 4. But again, interrupted here by people who specified they wanted index person number 5. And then we go on to assigning the rest of the number 4. However, when we get to index person number 5, remember, we've already assigned index person number 5 4 times earlier in the flow because of people who wanted specifically index person number 5. So we're just going to have only 4 remaining index person number 5s to assign. And then this kind of goes on and on and on. So this is kind of where all of it comes together, where the adjusted free flow gets interrupted, but it can still pull in the next person in the free flow. And then this last column is just simply using an index match to pull in the corresponding sponsor ID. So that's a lot, but it will make sense when we go back to master. And now we can look at the flow tab to look at the pin code and pull in the pin code of their assigned sponsor. Right? And then here you're just, again, pulling in the name with some fancy formatting. And so you can see here, Branda K is going to get assigned to the next 8 people who sign up. Same with Alejandro. But then when we get to Patricia, it gets a little messy because people have requested Mikey M in between where Patricia would have naturally gotten those assignments. And then when we get to Mikey M, only 4 remaining Mikey M's get assigned in the natural free flow order to kind of fill out his 8 slots. So this last column is just a testing and validation column. It's just checking, hey, how many people have you been assigned a parent to? And so it should be 8 in total, and then you can see we're currently on Marlis D, and she's as people sign up and they don't request anyone particular, they're going to get slotted under Marlis D. So this is just kind of checking, hey, has everyone gotten 8 people / who's next up on getting more people? So lastly, we build a chart. So I hand created this org chart just by coloring cells and using borders because you'll see later on that you can't use the Google Sheets built-in org chart widget. So how it would work is someone would put their 7-digit PIN code here. They would appear in the orange box, their sponsor the yellow box, their 8 people in the purple boxes, and then they could also see the 8 green people assigned to each of their purple people. So you can actually just code in the formulas in each of these colored cells. However, I actually like to build a little table underneath and then just reference these cells to the correct spot in this table. So you can see here that I try to show which people these corresponded to with this color column. So this is going to tell you who to pop into your orange and yellow tabs. These are your purple people, and then the rest are your green people. So the way you do it is you just look at the ID that is being populated in here. Then you go and look at the master tab and try to find who the parent was assigned for that ID. Then for your purple people, you know who the parent ID should be, right? It's the person who put their PIN code in here. So that's going to be the parents. And then you're going to go into the master and look for all of the PIN codes in column A, which match a master value of this row. And then you can kind of just copy the same exact pattern for all the green people. So let's try Brenda K's PIN code. So you can see everything gets filled out. She doesn't have a sponsor because she was the first person. So let's look at Alejandro. Right, so you can see it's dynamically updated. And then scrolling down here, you can see how the table is filled out, looking at all and finding all the different PIN codes everywhere. These columns are mainly just, again, index match to pull in those names just so you can display names in your org chart. Now I'm going to show you why the Google Sheets org chart plugin didn't work. So let's go back to Brenda K because she has a full org chart. And we're going to highlight these 2 columns, insert chart, org chart. So you can see here that Google Sheets only will form org charts horizontally. And therefore, because we have 8 people assigned on the lowest node, there's no way that this would be usable in any way. You can't even scroll here, right? So this graphic would have to be so wide for you to look at your entire org chart. So that's why I built this template here. And I think it's quite professional and pretty looking, so it's hopefully acceptable. And so that's it. I hope you found this tutorial really helpful. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Also, if you have ideas for a more streamlined way to do so, especially the flow tab, I would love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.